The interrogation room is a room where police officers and even the people close to the accused have seen the darkest, most twisted secrets getting unveiled. Inside this room, every action, every word and syllable, every posture and facial expression is broken down and analyzed by law enforcement and true crime enthusiasts. Today's case is not going to be a crash course in criminal body language and guilty facial expressions. Rather, you'll see how a suspect goes from zipped lips to singing like a bird within minutes. And it's all thanks to one incredibly smart detective pulling on just the right strings to get this man to speak. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, well, it's kind of a what you see is what you get kind of channel. I post new true crime documentaries every single week. No AI narration, no overhyping things, just true crime. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost a thing and it just keeps you up to date with all of my latest cases. Michelle Chaffin was born on June 6th of 1981 to parents Walter Chaffin and Donna Johnston in Humble, Texas. Humble is very close to Houston, and it's considered to be a comfortable, safe, and thriving community. A great place to raise a family. Ever since Michelle was young, she never met a stranger. Everyone was her best friend. She loved to talk to people, and people typically loved talking to her, as she had an incredibly warm personality and was just easy to be around. Since Michelle and her brother David were the only two siblings in the Chaffin home, they were naturally very close. David defined Michelle as his second mom. Michelle had a very nurturing personality. She was a very protective sister. She and David did everything together. I mean, it was basically like they were joined at the hip for their entire childhood. Michelle was an obedient and responsible kid, but when she graduated high school in 2001, she very quickly met a man and married him. Now, we don't know much about this man other than the fact that his last name was Warner. But before anyone knew, Michelle got pregnant, and 9 months later, the couple welcomed a healthy baby girl named Haley. But it was a short period of bliss for Michelle, because all too soon in 2003, the marriage fell apart, and Michelle and her husband got divorced. Haley actually went to live with her dad, and this was the moment when Michelle hit rock bottom. Dealing with the divorce and having the child that she loved so much taken away from her, it just weighed too much on Michelle, and sadly, she couldn't find a healthy way to cope with things. Michelle soon fell into addiction, and this only made things far worse. She turned from a happy wife and devoted mother into a bit of a partier, and she was falling downhill fast. She would disappear for days and even weeks on end, and she was even arrested for possession at one point. When Michelle would disappear from the face of the earth, as she so often did during these days, her family would be in a constant state of panic. They knew that Michelle was suffering, but they just didn't know how to help her. All they could do was just hope and pray that Michelle would find her way back. And miraculously, she did. It was as if one day just an epiphany hit Michelle, and she knew that she had to turn her life around for the better. Michelle realized that her daughter Haley was the most important person in her life, and she didn't want to let her down by letting her see her own mother like this. So Michelle started her journey of getting clean and picking herself back up, and she even enrolled in college. She was studying criminal justice, and she had dreams of becoming an attorney. She also started working as a secretary at a medical firm, and finally, things were looking up for Michelle. She'd been clean for an incredible 4 years by 2008, and she was doing really well in life. She'd finally found her way back out of the darkness, and her family couldn't have been more proud of her. Michelle was back to being responsible, punctual, and the ambitious woman that she was. It was also in 2008 when she met someone else at her workplace. It was a man named Mark Castellano, and he worked as the IT guy. Mark and Michelle were the complete opposites of each other. Even though her family was happy that she'd found someone, they genuinely did not know what Michelle saw in Mark. According to Donna, Mark was just an oddball. Donna's impression of Mark from the beginning was that he was just weird. She thought that Mark was just a, quote, strange man. She genuinely could not understand why her beautiful and accomplished daughter would go for someone like Mark. Now, I'm sure every mom wants the best for their daughter, and to every mom, her daughter is the most beautiful person in the world, and no one will likely ever be good enough in their eyes. But seeing Mark and Michelle together, they didn't fit. Even Michelle's brother David thought that there was something about Mark that was just off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he just couldn't shake off the feeling that Mark wasn't the right choice for Michelle. But Michelle apparently didn't see anything wrong with Mark, and the couple's relationship got pretty serious. Within a year of dating, Michelle was pregnant once again, and this time the couple welcomed a baby boy named Caden. But soon, history would repeat itself, and Mark left Michelle and Caden without so much as a word. Maybe it was the stress of having a child, maybe it was something else, we don't know. But what we do know is that Michelle and Caden had to fend for themselves, as the relationship ended without so much as a moment's notice. It was hard for Michelle in the beginning. Having to take care of a newborn and go to work was getting to her, and she was understandably exhausted. But fate had something amazing in store for Michelle. She was offered a job at a law firm in Houston, Texas, for which she would have to move there permanently. She didn't know anybody from Houston except for one person, and that was Mark. He lived in Houston, so Michelle reached out to him and talked about an arrangement. So Michelle was going to be working long hours each day, and she wanted a place where she and Caden could live, and Caden could stay there safely and have Mark watch him. Now, I want to stress that Michelle did not want to get back together with Mark. Obviously, she didn't want to start a relationship with a man who couldn't commit to just taking care of his child. She just wanted Mark to co-parent Caden, to take responsibility for the child that they had together. Mark eventually agreed, and the three lived in Mark's apartment in Houston. So all in all, things were going great for Michelle. She had a stable job, she was on her feet again, and she was co-parenting her son with Mark. But then, without any warning, Michelle disappeared. Michelle's silence started to gnaw at everyone when her brother David couldn't get a hold of her. See, David and Michelle talked on the phone every single day, no matter what. And even if Michelle was busy, she would return his call afterward. But David got no response from Michelle all day, or even after that. That was when he called Mark and asked him where Michelle was. But what Mark went on to say knocked David off of his feet. Mark said that he and Michelle got into an argument on September 22nd, and Michelle just went into her room, slammed the door closed, and when Mark went inside sometime later, Michelle was gone. Vanished, just like that. She didn't take her car, and she even left Caden behind, and Mark didn't know where she was. It was very unsettling, and immediately 31-year-old Michelle Warner was reported missing. The investigators went to Mark's apartment to conduct a welfare check, and there they noticed a couple of weird things. First of all, the detectives noticed computers in the house, which wasn't exactly alarming. Mark was an IT guy. But what was strange was that all of the hard drives were taken out, and they were nowhere to be found. Moreover, detectives found a handwritten note taped to a mirror, and it was by Mark, addressed to Michelle. In this letter, Mark seemed very angry and told Michelle that he was taking Caden with him to his parents' house. Also, Mark accused Michelle of being on a drug-fueled weekend, even though she was supposedly sober for about 4 years by this point. Mark didn't hold back from calling Michelle names and belittling her, and overall, the letter left everyone feeling confused and on edge. Last but not least, detectives also went into Michelle's room, and even though nothing looked out of the ordinary or alarming, one detective just stood in front of the closet. Now, I know what you're thinking, but there wasn't really anything in the closet. But this detective just couldn't shake the weirdly cold feeling that something had happened in this little enclosed space. The investigators couldn't put their finger on it, but they felt like this closet was trying to tell a story. The police had to talk to Mark to get to know why he was so angry at Michelle. And from this point on, things got really bizarre really quickly. And this interaction, and everything else that followed, would lead to this story going down in true crime history as one of the most unsettling and intriguing cases. The detectives went over to Mark's parents' house in West Texas, where they wanted to get a rundown from him. Turns out, Mark had a question himself, and this would leave the investigators dumbfounded. Mark straight up asked if he could be interviewed by the famous Dr. Phil. The mother of his child is missing, and all this man cares about is getting a few minutes in the spotlight. But regardless, the detectives pulled some strings and managed to get Mark a spot on Dr. Phil. Now obviously, this was done at Mark's request, but I have to assume that the officers must have only agreed to this because they thought that his appearance on the show may help them get some leads about where Michelle may be. But Dr. Phil interviewed Mark, and even though he didn't admit to having a hand in Michelle's disappearance, his overall demeanor was bizarre. Mark would only talk about himself, and it didn't take Dr. Phil more than a couple of minutes to realize that this guy was extremely narcissistic and emotionless and couldn't care less about his missing ex-girlfriend. He was just basking in the light of his first and quite possibly last 15 minutes of fame. After this interview, detectives were itching to interrogate Mark, and with all of the recording devices and everything, well, they had their own tricks. They wanted to gain Mark's trust, paint him as a saint, and coerce him into spilling whatever he was hiding. It was a weird approach, but considering this man was a narcissistic tool, what better way to butter him up than to tell him how great he is? And these detectives knew what they were doing. The investigators knew that Mark would love the attention and praise, and luckily it didn't take long for Mark to play right into the hands of the police. The questioning started like any normal conversation. Detective Phil Waters assured Mark that he was not under arrest and he could leave anytime he wanted. As soon as the questions rolled out, Mark began to show his very unsettling and twisted side. First of all, he addressed Michelle in a very negative way. He called her a pretty girl with a princess attitude who could get anything she wanted. Mark also claimed that Michelle was extremely violent and physically abusive towards him, even though Mark, being the absolute saint he was, never lifted a finger in retaliation. Mark painted himself as a victim in the relationship, and that was exactly what the detectives wanted. Detective Phil, playing right into the role of a sympathetic cop, had successfully gained Mark's trust, and he was actually being quite compassionate towards Mark, saying things like he understood why Mark kept up with Michelle's attitude, that his heart goes out to Mark, etc. On a roll now, Mark also brought Caden into this mess, and accused Michelle of not only being physically abusive towards him, but towards Caden as well. Detective Phil, after hearing Caden's name, decided to corner Mark with some good old psychology. He wanted to know whatever Mark did to Michelle was to protect Caden, and not because he had any malicious intentions to hurt Michelle. Detective Phil made it clear to Mark that something terrible happened to Michelle. They hadn't found her body yet, but Mark likely didn't know that. But at this point, Detective Phil wanted to know exactly what Mark had done to her and get a confession out of him, because at that point, there was literally no evidence of Michelle's disappearance. And if Mark didn't confess, then they had nothing, and Michelle and her loved ones could never get the answers they needed. For Detective Phil, this was a do-or-die situation. He spent hours building trust with Mark and making him see a friend in a police officer who understood why he did what he did. So as soon as Detective Phil played his last card, Mark finally gave in. And it was the first time during the entire interrogation that he got emotional. Not during the Dr. Phil interview, not when Michelle went missing, and not one time did Mark shed a tear for the mother of his child. But now, it was as if the aspect of hurting Michelle to protect Caden had cornered him, and the guilt of whatever he did to Michelle was finally setting in, and he couldn't hide it anymore. And so, Mark finally confessed. He ended Michelle's life. As soon as those words left Mark's mouth, Detective Phil felt relief, horror, and emotions of all kinds coursing through him. Instead of sitting in front of a grieving ex-boyfriend who's now become a single father, he was sitting in front of a murderer. I want to preface this next bit by saying that this is Mark's version of events. We will never truly know what happened that led to such a horrific escalation of events, so take what you will with this information. But according to Mark, he and Michelle were at his apartment. He claims Michelle had a snarky attitude that made him angry. She'd come home visibly angry, and she was determined to take it out on him. She was picking things up, throwing them everywhere, and ordered Mark to clean up her mess. Mark, being the helpless victim that he was, did as he was told, and in the process, Michelle even struck him a couple of times before turning around and going to her bedroom. Mark said that at that point, Caden was hiding in his room. This was the moment when Mark had had enough. He let his fury and rage take over, and he barged into Michelle's room and tackled her to the bed. Tragically, he ended Michelle's life with his bare hands almost instantly. But in an even more devastating scene, well, just minutes later, after Mark ended Michelle's life, Caden walked into the room, where Michelle was laying lifeless on the bed. This poor and unsuspecting child asked Mark what was wrong with Michelle, to which Mark answered, "Mommy's taking a nap." I can't even imagine what Caden witnessed. Maybe he didn't know that his mom was gone, but how do you recover after seeing something like this and knowing what really happened to Michelle, even if you don't realize it until weeks, months, maybe even years later? This little boy saw his mother's body just lying there, and he'll be forced to live with that image for the rest of his life. Mark quickly took Caden out of the room and made him a bath, after which he hid Michelle's body in the closet of their bedroom. In hindsight, the detective who eyed Michelle's closet suspiciously wasn't wrong. Something terrible did happen in that very room, and Michelle was kept in that closet at some point. And it's just so horrific and shows that intuition and gut feelings are rarely ever wrong. Mark took Caden to his parents' house in Michelle's car, and then he came back to dispose of Michelle's body. He loaded a plastic container that had Michelle's body in it into her own car and drove just outside of Midland. There, he dug up the ground and buried Michelle in a shallow grave before leaving. All of this was caught on CCTV footage as well. Mark could be seen driving back to his apartment in the early hours of the morning on September 24th. He was seen dragging the plastic container a little while after 3 a.m. before finally leaving the apartment in the car at 6 a.m. After the confession, Detective Phil called in his colleague, Sergeant Harris, and Mark reenacted the entire scene in front of them. Even though Mark had confessed to murdering his ex-girlfriend, there was still one more thing the investigators had to find to formally charge Mark with Michelle's murder, and that was Michelle's body. The detectives, as well as the FBI, tried to look for Michelle's body with the help of a map given by Mark, and after a bit of searching on the vast West Texas oil fields, they found something, and it would be a terrible climax to this investigation. It was a shallow grave, and upon digging, they recovered Michelle Warner's body. The investigators also searched a dumpster close to Mark's apartment, and inside it they recovered Michelle's credit card, which was cut into pieces, some clothing, a pair of sunglasses, Mark's business cards, and some black tape, which had been used to tie Michelle's body up. Finally, the police had everything to charge Mark Castellano with the murder of Michelle Warner, and he was arrested on October 1st of 2012. But even though Mark gave a full recorded confession to the police, this guy pleaded not guilty. At the trial, the prosecutors presented their main evidence, which was Mark's confession. The defense, on the other hand, went with the argument that Mark's actions were the result of sudden passion. But I fail to see how passion can be used as a legal excuse for murder. But Mark's attorneys argued that Michelle was an abusive woman who treated Mark like a human punching bag, and that on that fateful day, Mark had just lost it. He didn't want to be abused by this woman anymore, and so he acted in a fit of rage that resulted in Michelle's passing. The prosecution was quick to shut down the defense's claims of Michelle being abusive towards Mark. They argued that if Mark was being subjected to constant abuse, then he should have made formal complaints against her. Everyone who knew Michelle didn't believe that she was abusive for 1 second. And aside from Mark's claims, there's no evidence that Michelle was ever abusive to any of her partners or even her children. After the arguments, the jury had a verdict to give. On June 6th of 2014, Mark Castellano was found guilty of murdering his ex-girlfriend, Michelle Warner. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison, plus a $10,000 fine. He'll be eligible for parole in 2026. Michelle's passing was a horrific and unexpected blow to her family and loved ones. She left behind 2 children who were too young to even comprehend the meaning of loss. And sadly, one of them was present in the house when she was fighting for her life, and even saw her lifeless form, even though he probably didn't know it at the time. It's so devastating to think about Caden, who lost his mom at the hands of his dad, and now he has no parental figure in his life at all. Caden was only 3 years old when he lost Michelle, and it's just so sad that he has to live his life without any of his parents. As for Haley, she lost her hardworking mother forever. As of 2017, Caden was living with Mark's parents in Odessa, Texas. Michelle's mother, Donna, wanted to gain custody of Caden, but as of the present, there haven't been any updates, and it seems like she was unsuccessful in doing this. Haley, on the other hand, lived with her father when he and Michelle got divorced and up until the trial. Michelle made some mistakes in life, but she picked herself back up when she realized how badly she had messed up. She was on her way to building a good life for herself and her kids when someone with unchecked anger and resentment decided to steal the life from her so ruthlessly. Michelle's family was heartbroken and disgusted when Mark painted her as the bad guy and himself as the victim. Mark not only ended Michelle's life brutally, but he also didn't even hesitate to slander her image and character, which is just infuriating. Michelle will never get to become an attorney, as she had dreamed. She'll never celebrate her children's birthdays and milestones like graduations, weddings, and other memorable moments, all because of one person and his irreversible decision that changed and ruined more lives than one. This is just one of those situations that it just doesn't have a silver lining, and it doesn't really have a lesson to be learned, because this whole case just feels so random and unpredictable. Michelle was trying to do the right thing, making a better life for herself while trying to rebuild some semblance of a relationship with the father of her child. But without a moment's notice, Mark shut all this down and closed that door for good. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Lisa, J.M. Gajda, Angela Lemuse Garcia, and David Karsten. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it is a great way to support the channel and help out, and I really appreciate those of you that have decided to do that. So if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from the link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.